I'll start with my great-grandmother, Stiltz, S-T-I-L-T-Z, who crossed the prairie in 1846, the year of decision. Did you ever read that book by Bernard DeVoto? Marvelous book of all that happened in 1846, including my grandmother's prairie schooner voyage to California. On that same side of the family, my great-grandfather, crossed around, his family crossed, I guess, Strait of Magellan, perhaps. And he was born in San Diego in 1850, the first white child born in San Diego. On my mother's side, the family came, I think my great-grandmother eloped from Alsace and made it to Denver, where my mother was born and where I have had relatives until recently. I don't know if I have any longer. But France and England, the earliest Russ that I know about came to Massachusetts in 1680 something or other. And they moved from Massachusetts to Vermont and then into the Midwest and from there across the plains to California. My father used to make up all kinds of tales. He was a great Indian lover, and he claimed that some Indian relative of his, a Navajo, he was partial to the Navajos, swiped my mother from wherever she was, great-grandmother, and so there's Indian blood in the family, he hopes. My mother was a good singer. She had a good voice. And when I played the piano, I would accompany her in such things as Mighty Lacquer Rose, or what are some songs we used to sing? You mentioned one, Schumann Hike, Ernestine Schumann Hike did a wonderful recording of not only, with thee, dear heart, or as if, you didn't ask me to sing, did you? Oh, Lord, what will I tell about my parents? They were good parents. My brother and I, my older brother, would play Indians, and we had forts, and we got up from behind our forts and shot arrows at each other. And my brother was a good shot, and he hit me right there, right between my eyes with an arrow that bled profusely, and he was scared to death, and he rushed me into the house. And my little brother I hit with a baseball bat, and I rushed him into the house. We used to have a lot of lethal games growing up. We had some nice, pleasant games. You lived at the beach a lot, Laguna Beach, Carmel, Manhattan Beach. Learned how to swim, dog paddling, never did, and trying to evade the waves. That was the great fun of growing up, living at the beach. I don't know that much about it. I didn't know anything about my family until I did a sculpture for the courthouse in Washington, a new courthouse. And there were some illustrations in the Washington Post about some of the things I was doing, and a guy by the name of Russ wrote and asked me if I was related to him. I said, I have no idea. And he said, if you know the name of your father, preferably your grandfather, he will tell me. And he's the one who told me all the way back to Vermont, Massachusetts. Deep Springs. My father worked with another engineer, mining engineer, whose son went to Deep Springs. He was younger than I, but he started earlier than I did. And he had gone there for 2 years, and I heard about it from him, and I was about to not go to University of California, but go to Stanford. I thought that was a better school. And took the test and got in, and whereupon I was interviewed for Deep Springs and accepted. And so that's where I went for 3 years, between 29 and 32. most wonderful experience of my life, the 3 years on the ranch there. With wonderful fellow students, all 19 of them. We were 20 in those days. It's a big school now, it has 26. But in those days we were 20. And did these wonderful labors, learned how to iron a shirt in 5 minutes. I think my first assignment was working in the laundry, but there were other ones too. And I did the usual labors on the ranch, milked cows for half a year, and ran just did the usual ranch work. Had a garden 1 year, ran the office 1 year, and was postmaster. We had our own post there. A stage went back and forth between Big Pine and Tonopah, Nevada, every day, one direction one day and the other direction the next day. And I was the postmaster and canceled stamps and did all that stuff. And that was fun. I don't know what more to tell. I flunked a class, and that was my memorable academic experience, was to flunk whatever it was, calculus. That's when I decided maybe I won't be an architect after all, but try something else. No, I was going to be an architect, but I took a class in modeling, and that made me a sculptor. I guess I wasn't born to be a sculptor. It just was accidental. I went to Cornell to be an architect after 3 years at Deep Springs, and the class in modeling was required for the degree in architecture, and I just took a shine to sculpture and changed my major. And from there, strangely enough, my teacher in sculpture had gone to Yale and had won the Prix de Rome. And he thought maybe Yale would be a better school for me. I'd have better chances. That would hardly describe his loyalty to his job, but that's what he said. And so I did switch. And I didn't win the Prix de Rome, and I did get a degree in sculpture. The summer of '34, I guess, yes, I went to Mills as an assistant. My title was an assistant to Alexander Archipenko, who was one of the big names in the early part of the century as a modernist. And then the following summer, I was at 35, I was at Yale in that summer of, am I in the right years, 35? I went to Cranbrook to work with Carl Millis, whose work I admired and who was teaching at Cranbrook Academy of Art outside of Detroit in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan, and spent that summer working with Millis. I finished at Yale in '36, and by then I had a job. I was one of the luckiest persons in the world to get a job teaching at William and Mary and teaching sculpture. A new department was started by Leslie Cheek from Nashville, who had was starting a new department in art at William and Mary, and I was selected to be the sculptor. And I told influential friends, Telluride Association to be exact, that I was going to be teaching, and I would like to go to Europe and see things that I have to talk about. I'll be teaching art history and also teaching modeling, sculpture. And I got $400 fellowship to go to Europe, with which I went to 5 countries in 5 weeks, saw all the stuff I wanted to talk about, and there I was in Europe for that length of time. And that was Heil Hitler summer in '36. Yeah. And that was a memorable experience, and I learned a lot from that trip. I went from New Haven to Williamsburg in 1936, And the war came in very quickly. And I was drafted at the end of 42 and went to Richmond twice and fortunately had a hernia. And I was rejected and I got into the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services. I applied for that and I got in, accepted, and the job never came. They didn't tell me what I was going to do. And I got tired of waiting, and my brother suggested I join the Red Cross, and which I did as an assistant field director assigned to Fort Devens, Mass, and did that for 6 months and spent my time giving $5 loans to soldiers. And that seemed like a waste of time. And the new program, the volunteer program known as Arts and Skills, was being started in various hospitals across the country. Started at Letterman in San Francisco and Great Lakes, and one in Staten Island. I began to go to the other hospitals, start the program in some cities, and worked with the programs that were already underway, and did that until the end of the war. A woman whom I worked with in the Arts and Skills program lived in Warrenburg, I think, in Virginia, and she wanted a sculpture for her large piece of land, and I made a sketch of Abraham and Isaac. No, not Abraham, Jonah. And she thought Jonah was a bad luck symbol, and so she would not have it. Another friend during the war from Dallas liked it, and so I did it for her instead. During the war, I made sketches. I made a sketch for Jonah. Jonah, and that I've carried out after the war. And I did, I don't know, I made sketches, that's all. Didn't do any sculpture. Well, I was a copycat, and when I was with Archipenko, I tried to be a modernist, and when I got to Cranbrook, I admired Carl Millis so that I'm sure that his style influenced my work at that time. I would say that I'm not that original. I've done a lot of things that were influenced by other artists. From Millis, a way of broadening. This is such a minute thing, but I can't think of any broad things that might be of interest. If you're modeling a wrist, and you want the wrist to be full and have some guts, you would not drag your finger or your tool along lengthwise. You work across the form, which makes the form bold and rich. Now that's a mighty small thing, but such small things as that, working with somebody, you have to learn them sometime if you want to do good work. So that's one small thing. Maybe from Archipenko, stop being so realistic about everything and use your imagination and abstract things. My work has turned more, I would have learned that from almost anybody, I think, more abstract and less, and I've given up on detail of work that I do and let it be loose. My sketches are usually in clay. They're not drawn. I might start with a charcoal and paper, but very quickly get into 3 dimensions because that's what it's going to end up as. I will make, well, let's take Jonah, for example. The sketch was about no more than 6 or 8 inches in proportion. And from there, I made an armature at that size. In other words, the armature was on a big board. I would build up, for the mass of the thing, I would build up with wood. I would probably start out on the big board, a sketch, an outline of the thing. And within that outline would build up with hammer and nails and wood and wire to something, an armature, a base to build on. And from there, apply the clay, plastiline, whatever you're working in, water clay, if you're working continually at it, and keep it wet the whole time, and make a cage over it to keep it, which would be of canvas or wood, and lined with, and you'll keep it wet inside, and at night keep it covered with a cage that was moist. It'll keep the water clay fresh. I haven't used water clay for 50 years, 100 years. Well, how old am I? Since I've been in Memphis, because I haven't worked, I just haven't done it that way, and I don't spend that much time at it. I leave it alone maybe for a week, take a trip for a month, go off someplace and come back, and I can't keep the water clay fresh all that time. And so plastiline that has an oil base and that stays malleable is much more convenient. That's what I've used to work in. Then you make you tell Larry Luger to come and haul it off to the foundry and let him worry about it. Larry Luger is, in the last 25 years, how long it's been, has been a great asset. Because previously, I had to cast it in plaster myself, which is a terrible job, and crate it and ship it to New York, upstate, or the city, or wherever. And don't ask me the process in bronze, that's too much. But that will be done from a plaster cast. And Larry can work from a plaster cast just as well, but he doesn't have to. It doesn't have to be hard and solid. And he can make the mold and whatever is needed from the clay plastiline. Bronze is the logical step up from a plaster cast. The reliefs I did, I'm talking about private work maybe. Commercially, it could be the reliefs on Baptist, the hands that I did, blessing hands, and the healing hands. Those are in aluminum, and aluminum casting is not all that different from bronze casting. I don't know, I imagine there are other media too, materials. I don't know what they would be. Bronze is the usual one. Imperishable bronze. I met Ike Myers, who was a big person in the art. He was Mr. Culture of Memphis. And Kennedy General Hospital here. And we were, at that time, furnishing volunteers to teach arts and skills at Kennedy. And he then left Memphis. No, he would travel, I guess. He was still in Memphis. But when he would come to New York, I was living in Brooklyn after the war, and he came to New York and he'd invite me over to town to have dinner with him. And I used to go over there and kept up with Ike for a year or two until Mildred Hudson retired. And he called and said, "Will you consider coming to Memphis?" Which I did, and that was 55 years ago. I came to the academy not to teach. I said I came for an administrative job, and I didn't know anything. I didn't know enough to teach after the war. Everything had changed so in sculpture. Kids you didn't model anymore with clay, which is the thing I've always done. They were working more directly with materials, and as they did from found objects at one time. That was very popular at one time. And no, I came to do an administrative job and not to teach. The academy started life down on Main Street and moved from there to the Board of Education building down in Poplar, and from there to the two houses, 680 and 690 Adams Avenue, and the carriage house between them on Adams at Orleans. And we had these two marvelous old buildings, and well, three buildings, because the carriage house was we used for and its little auditorium for lectures, art history lectures. But it was a wonderful place to work. Loved it. The trustees talked the city into letting us have some property and having a competition. It was sponsored by the city, and because then we relied greatly on our income and our operating expenses from the city, which was very generous to the school in those years. It had started, can't give you the exact dates, but the Board of Trustees had some very influential members who were friendly with the city government, and we enjoyed their considerable funds to operate the school. In 1957, we had the competition for a new building, which at that time was to have been an all-purpose building for the academy and for other activities, art activities in Memphis as well. And the competition was won by Mann and Harriver, Bill Mann and Roy Harriver, and lo and behold, we had the beginning of a wonderful new building, which we moved into in February of '59. Is that it remained, I think, a very informal and friendly place. It did change in a lot of ways, maybe, because we became accredited, fully accredited, both regionally and nationally, and joined the National Association of Schools of Art and Design. And we became more reputable, maybe, but I think it didn't change us too much. We had a wonderful janitor, I guess he would be called, council. And council's, one of his jobs was to walk the mail to City Hall, which did our mail for us, among other generous things. And I thought that was a waste of council's time when I could take it in the school hearse, as we called that bus we inherited. And so I started taking the mail, running the mails, we called it, down to City Hall. And that became a tradition. I began to be asked down at City Hall, and one department after another, to decorate their walls with student work. So I began to, almost every day or so, I would take down work and hang it in. I kept a rotating exhibition schedule going down at City Hall, which was one thing that we earned our keep with the city fathers through decorating the rooms of City Hall. My office is right at the back of the Rosalie building, the 680 building, and I could hop out of my window onto the volleyball court. So that was a rich source of fun in those days. Yeah, then we had a good volleyball team. In fact, I gave at one commencement, I remember giving instead of a degree to the students, I think it was the wife of one of our students got a degree in volleyball. She was wonderful. Burton, I guess, was the symbol, the most significant member of the family, of the faculty. Burton had started teaching in the 30s, hadn't he? I think, and he was a graduate of Cleveland School of Art, Institute, I think it is, and in sculpture. And the first thing I remember from about Burton, my first year here, he said, "Please get me out of this terrible subject of sculpture. I want to be a painter. I am a painter. Get me loose from here." And so I was able to get Brian Watkins, who had been graduated from Yale, and I guess I heard of him through school up there. And Brian came and really had sculpture going full tilt by that time. And Burton was able to devote himself to calligraphy, and was the great teacher of Bill Womack, who turned into Burton claimed Bill could out calligraph him any day of the week. But he was so great at both calligraphy and at painting and drawing. But Burton was our father confessor in those days. He knew he could do anything. I have known two saints, maybe three, in Memphis, and I think we need saints occasionally, not too many. But Burton is one of the saints of all time. And he was just someone to be proud to have known, given thanks for having known. Murray Rees, I got through the RISD, Rhode Island School of Design, which I knew had a wonderful photography department. And at that time, Joe Rufo, who was teaching printmaking here, wanted to add photography to his program, it being a print method. And so we got Murray by talking to them at RISD and saying, if you can get Murray to come, you'll be lucky. And we were lucky. And suddenly Murray took the bit in his teeth and he just took off. And Joe Rufo was left with a new department in photography. He thought he was just going to add photography to his printmaking department. But Murray was too much for him. And he took over and had developed a wonderful department in photography. I think the faculty now that I remember better are the later ones who were probably graduates of the Academy, who gave us some of our best people. Vida Reed, namely, who was an early graduate in my day and who only now is retired in recent years, and who's greatly loved by all of us who knew her, who've known her, and who had a recent show, a beautiful show out at David Lusk Gallery. And that was in the days when you could hire without going through all the rigmarole you have to now today to put out an invitation to everybody to apply. I don't know. I was in a lucky time when I was teaching, because I could do pretty much hire and fire with greater ease than you can now. We had a memorable occasion when the son of a Southwestern professor who taught for us also was kidnapped. The way to get the kidnapper to release that boy was to appear on television and say that we would remove from the school some photographs of nude females that Murray had brought in for a wonderful photography show, and that didn't seem to bother anybody but this one man who was responsible for this kidnapping. And to remove the pictures and promise that we would not do it again, we made all kinds of promises. But anyway, that was one of the big events in our early life of the Academy. And let's see, there was the bomb planted on Burton Callicut's car too in those days, those rough days. And our assistant director, I have its painting in the other room, went and got rid of the, what was his name, Louis Sedbury, went and yanked the bomb off of Burton's car and did something so that it wouldn't explode. So that was another of our adventures in the early days of the school. I had the police stationed in my house here for 2 weeks at one time. They had told, and my mother was living with me at the time, and they said that they were going to get rid of me, and if I didn't do something, and which concerned my mother, and so they parked on my premises for a couple of weeks, make sure I was protected. We had some rough times once in a while. The most difficult part of my job when I came to Memphis to be the director of the Memphis Academy of Arts, what would be the most difficult? According to your mother, my greatest fort was in picking up trash. And some of the other things, I trimmed the hedges. These are the easy things. The most difficult was running the school properly. Well, one is, if you run a school, you're most proud of your graduates. So let's just pick a graduate for fun. Vida Reed, let's say Vida's our greatest success in teaching. And the fact that we were able to, the others, not I, have been able to put this college on its own feet and run itself and do all of the things it does without city help, but still occupying a building that the city built and that is an architectural gem too, and still is alive and well and getting more and more students. The most important thing to impart to my students about modeling is not to keep it loose, keep it fresh, not to have it tighten up, get hard, surfaced. I think I'm thinking it in relation to my work too, because I've loosened up finally in old age instead of doing things so exact and realistic. And one portrait head I did when I came to Memphis, spent 40 sittings on. Now, Hollis Price I did in, 3 or 4, and told him that Jameson Jones was going to work with us at school. And he was so excited about that, he just sat down and did not pose at all. That was the end of it. So we decided that's the end of it. Let's just leave it at that. I think that's one of the things. I just had fun teaching. I knew the New Testament pretty well. It was while teaching the history of sculpture, especially of medieval work, that I was faced with this marvelous sculpture from that period, and so much of it was based on the Old Testament. And I knew nothing about it, but in order to even talk about it to the kids, I dove back into the Old Testament, read much of the Old Testament, which was so fascinating with its subject matter that I started doing work in that, with that subject matter. The person I made the sketch for didn't like the subject because Jonah is in bad luck it's traditionally a symbol of bad luck, I think, a Jonah. Speak of a Jonah as being up. Am I crazy? I'm sure about that. And so she did not want a Jonah in her, on her premises. And so I did for her the discovery of Moses that was in my recent show at school, if you may remember, that I did. And she and that was very successful down in Virginia. And she lived in Georgetown. She married a Navy admiral and had a beautiful home in Georgetown outside of Washington. And had a beautiful garden and a pool. And she had made a setting for a bold relief against the ground, where it looked from the photographs. I never saw it in place, but the photographs made it look very successful. And what happened after that, or who has it now, I don't know. That was long ago. Of all the people in the Bible, he was one. He wasn't my favorite. I don't know if I think, who was Benjamin, and the brothers. Was Benjamin the youngest of the brothers. He became one of my favorites, and I did him. I did certain characters many times. I became attached to them, and they make the sculpture. They inspire you to do things that you might not do otherwise because of their stories. I'm a storyteller in sculpture. There was a capital on a column in a cathedral in France, Autun, A-U-T-U-N, of a subject. I used to have a postcard that tells the story. It's this is now in the New Testament. It's the Magi. It's having seen it makes me cry to talk about it. The star in the sky, and on this little capital of a column, the three magi are in bed. They're lying. They're out. They're going to have the vision, and it's done with a blanket across them, and the star up there. Well, it is so moving. Just that story, I just die over it. I really do. And it's influenced me ever since. Just reading the Old Testament has had much to do with my work in recent years. Well, I started out doing a lot of portrait sculpture, as you know, and that's life sculpture. The first one I did was at school at Cornell, and it turned out very well. It was just an assignment, and everybody in the class was doing a head of the janitor or whomever. I don't know, just somebody who was available to try your hand at doing a portrait. And that I had a knack for doing it, and that was stayed with me for a long time. Well, one I guess would be Abe Plow. He was a famous product of Memphis. Somebody talked Abe Plow into sitting for a bust by Rust, and so I tried to let me pick him up over at where he lived. Where did he live? And bring him over. He could not be brought by me. That was dangerous. He was subject to being clobbered, be kidnapped, and so he had to have his chauffeur bring him back and forth. And he was a wonderful subject. He could talk to me like a father confessor, and I could have been, if I just devoted my life to working on Abe Plow, I would be rich and famous. And I loved doing Abe Plow. That was great fun. Ben Goodman, one of our great trustees and good friends, was another that I enjoyed working on. I think that's the one that did more sittings than anybody else. I think we counted maybe 40 sittings for Ben. But then that was in the days when I did everything very smooth, slick, finished, you might call it, which I don't work that way anymore. I tried to do one of Arthur and Maggie Halley's daughter Jean, and that was a disaster. I just can't do a beautiful woman. It doesn't come in sculpture. And a man has a much more rugged visage, you might say. Maybe a bonier structure. It seems so to me, anyway. It's not, and which lends itself to sculpture better than a soft, beautiful face. I did Everett Cook. I remember doing that so well because he was to take up his time posing for a head was. So I relied a lot on photographs that I took, because I have on so many heads I've done of famous people or of deceased people, because I've done a lot of Estes Kiefover, for example, I did after he'd long since gone. So I've relied on photographs a great deal. And I remember Everett Cook, though, because I think he was able to sit only maybe once or twice, and I worked from photographs, and finally Ned came after I was ready to show it to him in fear and trembling that he would just say, no good. And he said, leave it alone, it's perfect. That was a moment of triumph. Anytime you've been doing a portrait, that makes you feel awfully good. I already mentioned, did a head of Ben when I first came to Memphis. It was down at his at the legal office now, and when he moved into his new house, he had a big fireplace and a big wall above it that called for something significant, and by that I mean a sculpture, not just a painting. And so I decided to, as a subject matter, I selected 4 of his interests in life, which were a family cup, a silver cup that had been in the family for generations. That would signify his family, which meant a lot to him. Another was the visual arts, and for that I needed a shape to join the family to the other end of the sculpture, which was fairly large. At the other end was law, his profession, and music, in which he was greatly interested. For music, I had a lyre, a large lyre. For law, a big book, a law book. But between them, I had to connect those with the family in some way. And out of a painting that Ted Fairs had done, and that had a story, when we were down in Adams Avenue. John A. Denny, I think was named Denny's, burned, a wonderful fire down the street on Adams Avenue that Ted had visited and done a nice painting for him. And in the painting was a very small shape, 4 or 5 inches long, with spikes on it, and that's all I needed. I blew that up to several feet, and that was his portrait, symbolizing his family, his interest in art and music, and his profession of law. That was that sculpture. And I worked on some big things. I worked on big things for the World's Fair in 1939 in New York, that World's Fair. And what else? I've done some big Dr. Deal, are you thinking things like that? Well, a commission will make you work at some scale that you might not have tackled otherwise. I was working with my teacher at Cornell, had a big job. He won a commission for the federal building at the fair, and I was free in the summer, and so I moved to New York and worked with him on some jobs he had. That's how I got into that. I think if I had to choose one of my architectural sculptures for a site that I've done, I would select the baptismal font at Idlewild, which I was reluctant to do it. Maybe I was doing other things, and I put it off and put it off until I was reminded finally, and I just said, that GD baptismal font, I'm going to do it now. And after I cussed a bit about it, I decided I had to do it. And so then I did do the font, and I had liked that triangular shape that it has, and I enjoy doing the top of the tree of life, I called it, the lid on the top, but nobody else likes it because it weighs a ton and it's hard to get off, I think. But I enjoy doing that, and I like the way it's placed also at Idlewild Prez. That's maybe one of my favorites. The pair of hands that I did, one was the blessing hands, over a hand over a Bible. The other was the healing hands. And I selected a pose in which just the hands, that's the only thing that is on the reliefs. The blessing hands and the healing hands. And the healing hands had a doctor, happened to be Greg Shetley, pulling on his rubber gloves, and I just took snapshots of his doing that, and that's how we managed to do that relief. And I like those two reliefs, so I'm glad they have been used. One is now downtown, part of Baptist, and the other is in West Memphis. So I've had an opportunity to do sculptures that I've greatly enjoyed doing. I like doing commissioned work, to have work that has a specific place for it. I've done some wood carving and no stone carving. I'm just not a carver. I've always been a modeler and a work in clay. I'm not a sculptor. I'm just I don't consider myself a great sculptor. It's been something else, a source of enjoyment.